So we're back again, and now everyone's being badly behaved. We're obviously more comfortable in each other's company under these lights. But we're going to have another conversation now. Our previous conversation in the mini series was about what it's like being coached. But today we're going to talk about what it's like to be a coach. So I'm joined again with Catherine and Hayley. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. What would be... let's do it the other way around. Your first sort of coaching session. And actually, maybe, Catherine, we talked in the last episode, you said that you had this, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, kind of this instinct of, I'm working with this teacher, I need to give them some feedback, they're more experienced than me, I'm going to go with this coaching model. Was that through design, or did you think this is the way to get this across, or did you think, I'd just rather do it like this because it's less abrasive?
I think the latter. I think I had coaching training, as we discussed, but I didn't go into that conversation thinking I'm going to take a coaching approach, but I did go in open-minded to just see how they were going to respond to me. And it just felt more natural for me to take the coaching approach. It felt more appropriate, more humble, and more respectful of their greater level of experience than mine. But it didn't take long. I think that first conversation that I had, half of that conversation demonstrated to me this is the way I'm now going to intentionally have these conversations moving forwards, because the impact was so clear to see in their level of openness with me. Mm-hmm.
And Hayley, you're ready to go.
Yeah, I think I just want to put out there right at the beginning of the session that for me, on a journey of coaching, becoming a coach is possibly one of the most scariest steps.
Okay. Because
when you are being coached, it's exactly that. Somebody else is doing that to you. It's your choice in where you guide that session and how you respond to it. But the frame and the structure of it is coming from your coach. When you are then sat in that seat and you are the one to provide that, it's a great responsibility upon you. And I come across many people who, when they make that first step into it, there's a big sharp intake of breath, and there's how am I going to be able to do this? And almost their thinking as a coach, when they first become a coach, is so much more rapid and in their heads, rather than the person. When you're asked questions, you simply respond to the questions. When you're trying to frame the questions, that's completely different. You're trying to be, and often something that people can fall into is they're trying to plan the questions too much because they're conscious of, what do I say then? What do I say here? Where should I take them? And a big technique to get used to is to be able to question within the ebb and flow of the conversation. The timing of that conversation must be really, really authentic to ensure that when you do ask the right questions, they land at the right time.
It's the dance of coaching, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Like we were speaking about last time. But I think also questioning, people put a lot of emphasis on the importance of deep questioning or powerful questioning in coaching. And absolutely, as you've alluded to it in your last conversation, they can be real gut-wrenching or powerful moment questions that can shift someone's thinking massively. But potentially more powerful is just the listening that you provide. So if you think of listening and questioning as perhaps two separate skills, when you listen to somebody really attentively, really actively, and by that I mean not just listening to the words, but looking at the person, listening to the tonality of what they're saying, where have they not gone with what they've said there. So, you're taking on a lot as a coach when you get skilled at it. But even in the first session that you hold as a coach, if you can lean into the listening much more, you don't need to think about the questions because they come, because you care and you've listened well. And that means that the questions you ask are going to land much better for your coachee because they've they feel really listened to, that's evident from what you've asked, and they're not being taken through your set of questions, which can feel quite like an interrogation if you do it ineffectively. But also you know that what you're asking is meaningful rather than just asking it because I need to ask a question.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd really like to sort of dig into that because I was listening really well, and I do mean that. But if we just again, just so it's actionable for somebody right at the beginning of their journey, and I feel like I know the answer to this, and it's going to be, Alan, it's not as simple as that. But what are the sort of elements that you would say, and it might be sort of different weightings of those things, but if you're going into a session, what are the elements you should aim to include as a coach? Is that a...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because there is a very basic framework that any session should run to. Setting out from the coachee, from the beginning, what do they want to achieve out of this session? Have they got something that they want to explore? You then use that middle part of that session to really dig deep into understanding and giving clarity to what it is they want to explore, what their issues are, what the different perspectives of that issue are, what perspectives possibly that they haven't explored up until now, so that it gives them a fuller picture, so that when you move them into the latter stages of any session, they're able to make decisions and decide on actions that are going to be really well informed, that they are going to be empowered to make because they're going to have been their decisions and their actions that they want to make, and then also exploring what this is going to look like if it is successful. So you're constantly guiding them towards exploring their challenge, whatever that may be, fully exploring what the solutions could be, but then helping them and guiding them to find exactly the right decisions for them to help to move that forward.
Yeah, every coaching session needs a structure for you as the coach as much as for the coachee, because we know that someone could turn up to that session and just start venting about everything, and you need to get a handle on how to make the most use of the best use of that time. So a structure is what differentiates a coaching session from any other type of conversation. So it has that takeoff, it has that what are we here to discuss, it has the general exploration, and then it has the landing, right, what are you going away with? And in our foundation stage, that structure is one of the 4 skills that we encourage any new coach to hold on to, and they've learnt those in the foundation stage, and they take them with them as they start to become a coach themselves. So structure is one. Rapport building is the other, because as we said last time, you're not going to have any meaningful conversation if there isn't the trust and rapport there. So you spend time being really genuinely curious about that other person. What has brought them to coaching? What are they interested in? Finding some common ground, just being personable and starting to build a relationship with them and explaining what coaching is and isn't, so they've got an opportunity to ask you any questions, but very much making it feel, as it is, that this is their space. So rapport building and structure, and then within the actual conversation itself, the active listening is key, and asking questions which are relevant to what they want to explore and which are future focused is key. So those 4 elements, rapport building, questioning based on good listening, and holding the structure, are the 4 that I would say if you can lean into those and utilise those, the session will be great. Of course, there's more you can do as you develop skills and nuances and so on, but any good coaching session will hold those 4 elements, and I think any session that does hold those 4 elements will be an effective coaching session.
However, just to throw it in there, as simple as that structure appears, and when you sit and explain it so clearly, really easy. However, new coaches can often get lost in it. And that first period of time where they're exploring all sorts of things, and there's lots of emotions in exploring these things, that can take a back seat, and they don't feel strong enough or purposeful enough themselves as a coach as they're trying to find their feet. And actually, it can very easily turn into a conversation where it's just a bit of a vent, a bit of a rant. But it's always, that comes with time. You do get some of those sessions where the new coach is thinking, I can't pull them back from this. They're virtually on the verge of
right.
tears here. How can I close this? And that does happen. And so don't be too hard on yourself if that does happen, but always go back to that framework and the purpose of the session and how you should be trying to ensure that follows that path. Simple path, but quite tricky at first.
And in those earlier sessions, rapport is so key.
It is.
So if that person needs that time to build that relationship with you by venting, and often it is the first time people have had this kind of space to just talk to somebody confidentially about themselves, often those first sessions don't follow that structure in the way that they will in future sessions, because it's a lift-off session, isn't it? It's let's just build the rapport first. So yeah, that first session often is wider ranging.
And you often have new coaches come to you going, I don't think I achieved anything in that session. You did.
Do you know what you achieved?
You did.
Absolutely. You're starting the relationship.
Yeah, and I can remember we had that exact conversation where I said, "Oh, I didn't do very well." Already
judging yourself.
Well, I mean, with my sort of preconception, but I said, "So how long does it usually take to start to move to?" And you straight away said probably about 3 months. I went, it went 5 then. It was because, and like we said, we're talking about elements which then naturally, if you're sort of 6 sessions in with a coach, that building rapport is something that threads through everything. It's not saying so maybe if you look at it over, they'll be equal over 3 sessions, but it'll be heavier in that first session. I know it never kind of works like that, but I suppose maybe something actionable for coaches, if they're listening to this, if they finish their first session and they think, we didn't really talk, we just talked about problems and there were no possibilities and no options, and I feel like I really let them down with this, that they didn't. They gave them that space and they let them hold it.
And I'd say involve the coachee on your reflections of the sessions too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I can remember I've coached she's now a school improvement strategic lead in a trust, but I've coached her for quite a few years now, and she's great to coach. She's so easy to coach. She virtually does it for herself. But I can remember 2 coaching sessions in particular where what she was exploring, she herself couldn't find a solution to get to. And no matter what questioning I was doing, clearly I wasn't helping her at all. And I called an end. I said, it feels as though we're going round in circles now. It doesn't feel as though we're getting any further forward. Let's just stop. Let's think. Let's arrange another session. And I literally did it on the Saturday morning afterwards. I'd done it on a Friday. So I said, let's pick it up on the Saturday, which she really wanted to do. The clarity that she then had on that Saturday was worth the Friday, which felt like a wasted coaching session. It really wasn't, because if she hadn't have explored it to the depths that she did, even though we ended that session feeling like we hadn't got to a conclusion, it was the prequel that we needed. It was to get to that other side of things. So sometimes, even though you have not got to that real, okay, that's been really purposeful, they know what they're doing, away they go, you have those other sessions for a reason too.
Yeah,
and
layers
to get
of the
to
onion,
a deeper level.
You got to start unpeeling all the stuff, all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the confusion, frustration. Look, what people bring to coaching is never simple, because if it was, they wouldn't bring it to coaching,
They'd have
right?
solved it themselves.
They're stuck, exactly. So it's tricky. So we need to acknowledge that things aren't always going to be solved in one session. And that transparency is really important. I think that we, as the coach, express what we're experiencing in those sessions as well. Not everything. If we know we're being distracted, we might not necessarily want to share that in that moment, But if we are, as Hayley experienced there, feeling like we're repeating ourselves here, are you getting what you want out of this session? What would be the most helpful way forward now? Do you want to stop? Do you want to come back to this? Do you want to just park this and talk about something else? But the agenda is always theirs. And the other thing that Hayley's exemplified there is that even in those sessions where you're just peeling the layers and don't feel like you're getting anywhere, the session still actually has had that structure.
If we hadn't have had that
still
first
session at the
session,
end,
we wouldn't have got we wouldn't have got such a powerful outcome.
Yeah.
that actually followed in the session that came afterwards.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of a friend of mine, did a course on writing and, works with writers. And he said that one of the pieces of advice he had, which I've heard from other places, was just to write every day. Just, even when you're just to write every day. And then when the sort of the explanation for that is it's like a well. And you've got kind of leaves and debris on the top of the well. And when you go into it, you've got to clear that. Mm-hmm. And if you leave it 100 days, it's all... Whereas if you just write every day, because you have to get rid of that till you get to that clear water. And again, with the coaching, when you regularly go into it, it's like those leaves you're just taking off. Whereas that first one, you might have to just keep on digging at that. So it takes all that effort and time, but it all sits on top.
And I think it's really important that coaches and new coaches appreciate that, because, as we've already said, people come to coaching as a coachee at different stages of readiness, and we can't take responsibility of that as a coach. So with some coachees, we might feel more frustrated because we don't feel like we're getting under the surface or to the core of the onion quickly. And we can sometimes berate ourselves, and obviously we want to reflect and think, could I have made that more powerful? But oftentimes, I'd say most times, it's because you've gone at the pace of the coachee, and that's the right thing to do. Because the moment you start driving it by your agenda, which is, I need to demonstrate I'm a good coach here, so I'm going to push this person to answer this and to think about that, you've lost the whole principle of this, which is to empower them to gain confidence in and learn how they think and what they need from it. So as a coach, use that reflection time to be really honest about what you've achieved, because it might not be these light bulb moments, but it is something really helpful to that individual. And being able to adapt your approach as a coach and the pace of your sessions and the depth of your questioning, depending on where that person is in their state of readiness, is really important.
I have a slight horror story.
Oh no, yeah, I probably have some too. Go on.
Which might be worth throwing in at this point.
Or editing, let's see.
Or editing, dependent upon how horrific people found it. So,
if we skip to talking about listening now,
that we've just had
in summary,
it's been edited.
So I had taken a coachee through the first part as a foundation coach, and they had got quite a lot out of it actually from the sessions, even though there was some slight hesitancy to begin with. So got a lot out of it, and we were moving to the point of becoming a practitioner coach, and we were starting to talk through, revisit the skills, and this is what you'll have seen your coach doing, this is what you need to do. And there are certain moments, aren't there, and I'm sure we've all had them in different guises in our professional and probably personal life, where you realise somebody really hasn't got it.
Okay.
And where it told me that they hadn't got it was just this one question. So the question that I was asked was, Hayley, what if I don't find what they're talking about very interesting?
Okay.
Clearly, he was not on the page of this is driven by the coachee, this is what they feel is important, your role. So even when you're starting to make that transition across, that was a moment where you really don't get this.
I had one with a practitioner coach who was 2 sessions in with his client, with his coachees, and I was doing a supervision with him, and he said, one of them's doing really well, they're really engaged. The other one, they're just not doing it right. Like, why can't they be more like the other one? And it was like, okay, as a coach, we
go back to
look at the person and what they need. But it's all come through experience, and I just, the main reason why the Leadership Edge programme was built in the way it was is to maintain the confidence of the coaches and increase their competence over time. And as Hayley said, it's really scary, particularly internally. Yeah. You've got reputational worries that you might have, and different relationships that you've got with people across the organisation. So to put yourself in the role of a coach can feel a bit disingenuous when you haven't yet been a coach. But everyone has to start somewhere, right? And the only way, and I remember this from my own coach training, the first time that you're put in the position of being coach can feel so awkward because you're
Yeah.
learning. It's like
Yeah.
you're learning to ride a bike in front of a colleague who's expecting you to deliver something, or you feel they're expecting you to deliver
Especially
something.
if it's their first time being
Yeah.
coached, and you've both got that.
So transparency
imposter-
again
yeah,
is
absolutely.
key, and we're in a learning culture, right? And we need to demonstrate that we are lifelong learners too. And so starting those coaching relationships, if you are a novice coach or you're just learning how to coach, with that and saying, don't mind telling you, not done this before, but I know the skills. I found it really powerful myself. Thank you so much for taking this opportunity to help us both develop our understanding of coaching. I'll ask for feedback, at the end of each session or something. Please feel free to tell me if it's working for you or not, and let's learn together. So you take the pressure off yourself. This isn't about you being an expert coach. This is about you learning together, and it will take time until you develop that confidence to use some of those more fluid skills we were talking about.
And I think that's one of the powerful elements of the way that we roll out coaching, in that it's built into the model that you appreciate the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
So when you are becoming a coach, what you draw back on is what that other person's feeling sat in the coachee's seat. Because that was pretty scary too. That's scary, being vulnerable, opening yourself up, hearing yourself talk about some of the things, the deep and meaningful things that you find most challenging. And it's constantly using that mirror of, well, how I'm feeling vulnerable moving into this new seat, but I also remember what it felt like sat in that seat too.
Yeah.
And one of the non-negotiables that we put in place across our trust is the people that coach have to also continue to be coached themselves.
Yeah.
Because without it, you will very quickly forget what that feeling's like to be open, bare and vulnerable. And the second you lose that, for me, that's the moment that you lose your perspective on what your role is as a coach.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, and I guess just a quick aside, one of the things that I would say, if I could give myself advice at the beginning of all this, one about sort of being vulnerable and talking about things, and the other about sort of hearing someone talk about, especially if they're talking about their colleagues and things like that, is that I'd say to the coach, sort of don't worry about that information, because it's not I know we've had this conversation, what they're sharing isn't a fact. It's a fact they feel like this. It's a fact that they want to share this. But actually, they're just making sense of this situation. And this isn't some confidential information that is going to really, because all you are is a space for that information. And what they're sharing, it might be 100% true. Their interpretation might be way off. And I've had people come and talk to me sort of in my role as being a head teacher and saying, I know it's like this, and I'm thinking, none of that's true. Like, you've joined the dots with that, or somebody has said something to you, and I absolutely see that's a very logical conclusion.
However,
It's 0% true
Yeah.
because that person is actually doing that because of this, and that person's doing that, and that person's not actually isn't even involved in this. So that's all I would say to a coach around that is just be there and listen. But it's not confidential information.
No.
It's you're getting an interpretation.
And I think it's also really important not to get drawn into the story. We talked last time about the iceberg, and that above the water level is the problem, and underneath is the person. And if as a coach we get too drawn into, and then what happened, and what happened then, and who did that affect, and so on, then we're neglecting the person, because what we want to be focusing on as a coach is not the problem, but and why does this matter to you so much?
Yeah. Okay.
What could you do about this, which will make you feel good, which you believe, answers the queries that you've got about this. So if you ever feel as a coach that you're being drawn into the narrative, particularly internally, again, that's difficult, isn't it? Because you're hearing sort of dirty laundry about colleagues and so on. So forget that. What is it telling you about the person? What are their values? What limiting beliefs are they bringing to this? What aspirations are they bringing to this? And focus on those types of questions rather than the practical questions of who and what's happened.
Yeah, and I mean that's great. I mean this is a very selfish experience doing this as well. I'm pretending it's for everybody else, but this is
Won't even go live, will it?
benefiting me hugely as a coach myself. But if we talk about that, so we've talked about one of those. We've talked about rapport there. We've talked about structure. But if listening is that is your real bread and butter as a coach. anyone who is, you know, my friend or my family will tell you that I'm not an expert listener. You know, I'm trying. But to those out there that are going into it, maybe sort of like me, who listening isn't something that comes naturally to them, what's some things that we can do to develop that skill set of being a good listener or being a good active listener?
Fundamentally, there needs to be a curiosity from you, a curiosity to explore and to find out more. And you are listening, but you're listening with a coach's ear. And the coach's ear is quite different to sitting down with a cup of coffee and just chewing the cud about, and this happened, and you won't believe what so-and-so did, and it was this, and it was that, and it was the other. Because in your head, you've got that simple framework that's running underneath it of what do they want to solve, what's the issue, what's the challenge, what's the problem. The detail comes to help them to explore the options. That's absolutely fine. And then obviously leading on to what outcomes, what actions. But so you are listening, and it sounds very simple, you're just listening, but you're listening with a coach's ear. You're listening to help to try and frame. Now that might be through questions. It might be through clarification. So when people panic, often with new coaches, when they panic about, am I going to know what question to ask when? What you also always hold on to as a new coach is just reiterate what you think you have heard, because that in itself, that's always my go-to. That's my go-to now with however many years of coaching. If I'm not sure of where the question, and you can see the coachee is expecting a question, but I'm not sure what it should be, I go back and revisit. So am I hearing this? Is this an accurate picture of what you've said? Because from that will quite naturally, when you said earlier, the questions will always come. They will.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're not ready for you either as the coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the damaging things that a new coach can do as well is be thinking about the question that they want to ask, because they knew it really worked well with them. Like that one that Hayley asked you, you've probably got it in your head, like can I ask that to someone, you know, to really give them the experience that I had? And it might not land because it's not relevant to them. So absolutely giving yourself as a coach that space as well. And really not being scared of silence, not feeling pressure that a silence is a missed opportunity. Absolute opposite. A silence is a glorious opportunity to give both of you time to just sit with what's being said. And when the coachee gets used to that silence not being awkward, but actually being a thinking space, sometimes it can just be a nod or a smile that encourages them to talk and explore further. And I think you said last time, Alan, that, you know, you would start to self-coach in between sessions, and you can see it with coachees in sessions. If you hold the silence, then they'll go, so I suppose what this is getting me to, and it doesn't even need a question from you.
And sometimes those tiny little cues, making the coachee aware of them. I can remember with a number of sessions when people are becoming to begin that feeling of empowerment, their body starts to look different, their eyes look different. And I can remember saying to a couple of coaches, there's a twinkle in your eye there.
Yeah.
Am I just reading into things wrongly, or is that genuinely a twinkle? Where's that come from?
Yeah.
And that helps open up and go, yeah, I do feel different.
Yeah, and you can reflect that back on the coachee as well through a question. You can say, what are you noticing about your energy when you've been talking about this?
And that, I mean, that's something, I'm a vastly less experienced coach than the two of you, but that's been something in those rapport moments where it feels like you shift up when you just say that. Can we go into this a bit more, because your body language has completely changed. Now we're talking about this, and it just that just really feels like one of those in my coaching sessions. The kind of, that's a key sort of moment, like a key breakthrough. Catherine, one of the things that you talked about earlier was listening for what they're not saying, or listening for that bit that they're maybe skirting around. Oh, can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so in the the first thing to say about listening is how different coaching listening is from everyday listening. And Hayley's already mentioned it, but in our programme we talk about Me Too listening, which is what we spend 80% of our time doing, which is when we listen to somebody because we're going to add something to their thinking, basically one of our experiences or one of our ideas. And that's normal conversation. That's how, as humans, we relate and we create bonds because we have shared experience. But in coaching, that's not how we're listening. We're globally listening just to that individual, not to reply to them, but to fully understand them. Part of that, as I've said, is through the words, of course. We know this through teaching, don't we? Part of it is through body language. Big part is through body language. But also in the practitioner stage, we support the coaches, the new coaches, to look out for certain things in their coachees, which are the core values that person has, the limiting beliefs that person has, and the sort of fears, the emotions that person is experiencing. Like we've just said, are they lighting up or are they sort of dropping in their energy when they're talking?
So in a kind of live way.
Yeah.
The emotions they're experiencing.
Yeah, so as they're talking about things,
yeah,
we're listening to all that. And this sounds very complex and it isn't necessarily what a coach does on day one. No. But we're listening to the information, but we're not listening for that reason. Mm-hmm. We're listening to work out, what is that telling me about this person? What is important to them about this, and how are they feeling about it? And we're not actually going to know the answer, but then that can lead into those questions. If somebody gets emotional, for instance, it's often because they're talking about some misalignment of their core values, mm-hmm. or something that matters very deeply to them. And so reflecting that back and saying, I've noticed that, you're getting emotional here, or I'm noticing that, your energy has changed, or whatever it might be that you're noticing, the twinkle in the eye. Or sometimes it can be a sense of anger or frustration. Let's dig into that a bit more. What is it about that in particular that's really driving that emotion, do you think? Where's that emotion coming from? And when people understand what their core values are, it's not for us to tell them, that's because you're annoyed about this, because one of your values is X, Y, Z. But if they can unpick it, mm-hmm. again, that then empowers them to understand themselves in any number of situations where they get triggered or frustrated, but moreover allows them to think, what direction do I want to take moving forward, because I know what really matters to me. So you're listening for who they are as a person and what really matters to them and what could be barriers to them moving forwards.
And I suppose that would help with that reflection and that mirror, and also by you can seek clarity on that. It sounds like this is really important to you. It sounds like this is a bit of a thread. Is that because of this? Maybe you wouldn't, you might say value, but you might.
What makes that important to you?
Yeah. And that's part of. And again, I feel kind of conscious that we are really talking surface level here, but just to give people sort of a taste of things. But is there anything else around listening? Is there anything else, if you said, for somebody going into that session and going, right, I have to listen well, but I know why, I know what I think it would look like, but how can I actually achieve it? Is there anything else, any kind of...
I think it's the questions that you ask yourself when you're in that set. Do I know, have I heard enough mm-hmm. that I think that this person is going to be able to move themselves forward? Mm-hmm. So, the why is always a great question. Why is that important? Why have you done those things? To really deepen an understanding of, because unless they have unpacked sufficiently well all around their challenge or their issue or their problem, you've not necessarily equipped them enough ready to be able to solve it.
Yeah.
Now, some coaches do this quite instinctively and naturally themselves. They don't need a prompt from a coach to do it, because if they are exploring to a deep enough level, they'll start to join the dots themselves of, so actually what I should have done in that. And then you quite naturally move into it. If they're not moving themselves, for me, it's an indication that they've not explored enough. So that listening's absolutely crucial, because you're trying to judge from the active listening. Have they exposed enough? Have they shared enough to now be able to move on to the next step of their journey and explore what some of the solutions might be?
Yeah, and ultimately what you're doing is you're creating a space where they can hear themselves.
Okay.
So as much as we're listening to them, the important thing is that they're listening to themselves. So those techniques we spoke about earlier of paraphrasing and repeating some of what they've said.
I've made tallies of words sometimes.
Yeah, repetition, things like that we're noticing. And note taking is really helpful for particular words they're saying or things that occur to me as they're talking about. I don't want to get distracted about it. But mainly sort of key words or phrases that they're saying or questions that they've asked themselves. And then that really shows you're listening, because when it comes to a natural pause, would it be all right if we brought you back to something that you said earlier, which I'm just really curious about, whether it would be helpful to explore more? You said, da-da-da, and you can read it out. Oh, that's interesting, yeah. And then it's back to them. So it's demonstrating your listening to them so that they can hear their words back is really powerful too.
Because that also tops up that rapport and tops up that trust. They really are listening to what I'm saying to such an extent that they've picked up how frequently I'm saying these words, the phrases that I use. So when Catherine talks about they need to hear themselves, that's what you're doing. You're helping them to hear themselves.
And I find that is much more effective in building that trust than asking questions because I'm the coach.
I've had coachees say to me at times, I've never been listened to. She don't know. In fact, her words were, I don't think my husband listens to me as well as you do. No. Because you're listening from a different perspective. You're a coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was a session with my wife, wasn't it? But one of the things I guess that's, again, like kind of, it feels like it's coming off the page here, is that the listening builds the rapport, and the quality of the listening improves the rapport. The quality of the rapport improves what's being shared, and therefore makes you can then ask better questions because you've listened well. But the questions you ask help you listen to more important information and everything. And that's why I suppose every single time I've asked any questions about structure, or I've been looked at like, oh, silly rabbit, you don't really get it. And I was like, I'm just trying to like help my
from that description you've just given, you can hear the slow burn that's needed.
Absolutely.
You can't rush any of those things.
No, and you have to, and again, I'm sure anybody listening to this is thinking, I can see my coaches have done that, and you can hear like what a massive skill for something to sort of develop organically like that. It takes such a skill set to instinctively move between them. And so if we're going to if we just sort of finish up on them, because we this is such a sort of like a light touch on this, but if we talk about questioning as well, because what I'm hoping is that first time coach can maybe listen to this conversation and kind of just jump a couple of steps, or certainly put a couple of things of, okay then, like I was expecting too much, or there's no need to do that. But we've talked a lot about questioning. What sort of tips have you got for them with that questioning stage, that they've done a good job of listening, they can feel that rapport, they want to sort of help those things along the way? What would you say about questioning?
I think obviously it's asking the open questions as much as possible. Obviously you can do closed questions in terms of clarifying. So do you mean this, or am I right in thinking that this is the situation? So you can use your clarifying questions before going in with open questions. But yeah, when you're trying to formulate a question in your mind, try and use what or how as your starting point, because then the question flows better out of your mind often. So what makes that important to you? How might you approach that? Or who might you go and have a conversation with about
as opposed
to what coaches can find themselves doing is falling into the suggestions. So why don't you go and speak to so and so, or do you think it would be a good idea to go and do this? And you can end up making suggestions. So to avoid doing that and to making it really open for that person to do their thinking, always think about those first words that you put onto your questions would be one tip.
And I think something that we've not necessarily explored in this session, but may well do in future sessions, there are times and appropriate places where you do step out of that coaching seat if it is appropriate. Whenever that is done, I think it's always really important that the coachee understands that that's been done, so that they don't confuse you in your coaching role compared to you in your mentoring role. So often if you've got somebody who's going round and round in circles and it doesn't matter what questions you're giving, they're not able to see. You can step in and very explicitly say, this isn't me as a coach now, but would you like some suggestions from me in this role? Because it may well be that you've had experience of that. There's some really obvious things. But I think making it very clear that that is what you're doing, so that you never cross over the boundaries of people misinterpreting what you're doing as a coach.
Because if they did misinterpret, that whole principle of I hold you in unconditional positive regard with resourcefulness can be disempowering, because suddenly the experts come back into the room and taken over your thinking space. But I use the analogy of the golden pebble, which is what Hayley's describing there, of if somebody's really stuck and I know that there's just one key example or bit of information that might just shift their stuckness a little bit, then the analogy of the golden pebble would be, first of all, you ask permission. So would it be okay with you if I shared something just to help your thinking around this topic? So I've asked permission, and then I throw in my golden pebble into their pool of thinking very lightly, so very short. So this is something that I've experienced, or this is something that I've read, or whatever it might be, and then I step back and I see the ripples go. So then it's a question of, so now that I've shared that, I'll put my coaching hat back on, and how has that made any difference to your thinking now?
And I think the other potentially important element is, if you're being coached as a way to learn to be a coach, it's really important that that's not, say, oh, so what happens is you get to this point and then they kind of take over and start mentoring. So that's what I'll do next time. Whereas if you've had it explicitly, because that's what, Hayley used to physically sort of pretend to put in a mentoring cap on.
I think I might have just done that then.
So that it was absolutely
really
clear of this
yes.
coaching session has been paused, so to speak.
Yes.
And we're going to talk in, and I can remember that's how you shared the colour works to me. And, you got it out and said, let me show you this. And then went back to, so what's this
mean then?
So now with that information, let's go back into the conversation, and then the coaching went, and it was, it was really seamless.
You've just got to be really careful with it, haven't you? Because people tend to love it. People tend to love being given information.
Yeah.
And if you don't manage it, and I did want to talk a little bit about self-management as a coach, because I think that sort of wraps up everything that we've been talking about here. But if you don't manage it effectively and you just fall into giving people examples, and then you're taking on the role of the expert, which is just against the
and
the
you're
whole
going
principle.
you're going to shortchange, the power, the empowerment, and the drive that person's going to get from their own session.
Yeah.
That can happen, but that can happen somewhere else.
Yeah.
That session's about that person and that individual.
Yeah. So for any new coach, really, self-management, or for all the aspects that we've been talking about, really, is the thing to be reflecting on as you go through your journey of learning to become a coach. Is, what the skills are, but how do I apply them, and how do I gradually become more effective at managing them? We haven't spoken about managing the monkey, which is another part of the practitioner stage, which again, it's a habit that a lot of us have fallen into, where, particularly leaders in school. Where
I've found what often helps with that is that first initial pairing of a coach and a coachee, particularly with a new coach, to be coaching someone that they know very little about their role.
So they can't be the expert.
Because then that actively forces that situation of, I have to be curious because I don't understand what it is that you do. I don't have the solutions for you because I've not tread this path before. So that helps me along the way in staying in my lane as the coach and not stepping over and blurring any lines. It's really helpful in the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope from this, we can do some follow-up conversations like this, because there's so many tangents that I'm going off, and one of the things I'd love to talk about in the future is how to use that kind of live coaching in terms of not in a session, but in developing and when you're working with a team and trying to move them forwards. Sometimes you're mentoring, but a lot of the times you want to be coaching. But
and that's when you're truly growing a coaching culture.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. But I think that's another sort of couple of hours of conversation. But the last thing I'd like to talk about sort of this afternoon, and I'm saying the last thing again, even though
we had many lasts.
But the last thing I'd like to talk about is, I think we've alluded a lot to the frustrations you can have, and I think that there's been some really useful information there to say, like, don't get too bothered if that first session feels like that. Mm-hmm. But as a coach, my thinking is, and I mean, we can edit this out and you can just shoot me down now, but it's almost like, it's their progress, it's their session. So you don't want to walk away and assess yourself as a coach based on what they do, because that's for them. And if you're assessing yourself on they're making this progress and they had this many breakthroughs and they're solving these problems, so what advice have you got for coaches to say, this is how to assess yourself as a coach? Because you want to reflect, you want to sort of move forward and be a better coach next time and a better coach next time. What advice would you be like to focus on these things?
I think probably to dispel the myth that the actual success that the coachee experiences isn't exactly a testament to how successful the coaching session was. Mm-hmm. It's for the coach to assess how supported and appropriately challenged the thinking was in that session. Now, they might get to the end of a session and all the things that they've decided to do fall flat on their backside once they get outside of the coaching session and it doesn't work. That's out of your control. That they weren't your decisions to make. They weren't your actions to pursue. You're judging the wrong thing for you as a coach at that point. So you need to be really clear on how you are judging your success as a coach, and it's not as simple as the success that the coachee has experienced in how they've moved forward.
And coaches, I remember like when I was quite new to coaching, and I'd have my first coaching session with a new coachee, and that gap between session number 1 and session number 2 felt like it took so long because I was desperate to hear how effective it had been since the last session.
Because it's going to be a slight on you.
Exactly. I need to know they've done well. Otherwise, it's all been pointless. And actually, disassociating from that and actually get immediate feedback at the end of the session rather than waiting for session 2, because there's 2 types of feedback, or 3 types really, but you can get a feedback from your coachee during the session. How is this working for you? Are you getting what you want out of this conversation at the moment? So you can touch your way through in terms of the impact as you go. Then at the end of the session, as you're doing the wrap up and what are you going to go away and do, the way forward, also supplement that with what's been most helpful about this conversation.
In fact, I think I close every session with, has that been helpful?
Yeah. And then again, at the start of next session, you can tap back into that. Yes, what have you done? But actually, more importantly, what's, looking back at last session and the time you've had since last session, what has been helpful to you? What has anything changed for you in terms of the way that you've managed yourself or whatever it was that you were talking about last time? So rather than getting attached to the actions that they said they were going to go away and do, which is quite a performance management based focus.
They're not yours.
You're focusing on the person, on how have they experienced the coaching and the impact of the coaching since last time.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I was totally on board with that and just forgot that I've got to keep talking. So, I suppose from my point of view as well is that I would ask myself, did you stay focused on the person? Throughout, no matter how it sort of ended up, did you stay trying to understand them and trying to connect them to sort of something helpful to move them forward? And that's something that I would say for me personally as a coach. If I walk away and go, yes, I've delivered in that session, and if I try to do that better the next time, I'm moving in the right direction as a coach.
And when people do our lead coach program as well, we put all of the 4 foundation skills and the 4 practitioner skills into a bit of a matrix, so people can reflect on those competencies and think after every session or after every half term, however often you're doing the sessions as a coach, just to go back and rag rate it or to grade yourself in some way, just to keep touch with those basics of what good coaching is. Because I know I mentioned to you earlier, Alan, as well, that you can get very wrapped up in the technicalities of the skills. And if you focus on those too much, you forget the basics of what good coaching is almost. And just holding that space for somebody, making sure that they own it, making sure that, you know, you're not jumping in with solutions or advice, that you're listening really attentively. It's just really useful to come back to that. And people, you know, would have a different visual reference for that. Maybe they want a grid, or maybe they want a little journal that they write in, and just keep track of the skills that you're applying and using. Because it's a reminder, isn't it, of, oh, I've got this, I've started to coach very much down this track, and I've kind of forgotten about this element. So maybe next time I could just focus on that. So using those skills from our packs, I think, is a useful
and I think there's
framework.
an abundance of different strategies for coaches out there. This is something that never stands still. There are different structures that you can use. And when you become, you know, you've built quite a bit of experience up, you start to reach into that toolkit much more selectively, because you've got an arsenal of skills then that you know work in different scenarios. And as you're getting to know your coachee and you can hear where the sessions are leading to, you might bring to them, actually, I'd like to use this structure today. I think this might really help you.
And what's really different from perhaps other types of professional development is that you can't necessarily anticipate when you go into a coaching session which of those skills and tools is going to be appropriate.
Yep.
And it's really damaging to sort of plan in advance, oh, I'm going to use this model with this coachee today because I really want to use it or because I think it's going to be helpful to them. It's their choice. And so, just trying to think about those basic coaching skills. And another thing that rather than getting too hung up on, you know, complex tools and so on, you come to those as it feels right, rather than pushing yourself to do that. Work on the rapport and the relationship first. And then as a supervisor, in answer to the question about how should I be reflecting on my practice, is really, as Haley says, it's very complex, the kind of things that you could be reflecting on. And it's up to that individual coach to think, where do I feel I need to develop more, or where do I feel I'm at risk of, you know, under-delivering or not doing my best job in the coaching session, and reflect on that afterwards. But again, it's asking people to be a really reflective practitioner and building in the habit of, after a coaching session, finding 5 or 10 minutes to sit and think about what's happened in that coaching conversation, and taking that responsibility for their continuing development as a coach. Yeah,
and I think, you know, I'm disappointed that we're coming to an end of our time, but I'd say I hope that this has been really useful for people to listen to, and I really hope that coaching itself, both being a coach and being coached, for me, you know, it's been profound in sort of, it's changed the sort of direction of my life, and it sort of transformed me as a professional as well. So I really, really hope that people, you know, even if they got just a fraction of what I've got from coaching, but I'm really grateful for both of you for giving up your time, and Catherine, for you travelling down with us to see us as well. But if we just finish with, if I hand over to both of you, if you had sort of a sentence or two just for those people that are going out to be coaches, you know, just a couple of things for them to keep in mind that might just keep them on the path. If I just hand over to you two for the final words, and just thank you again for joining us all today.
So final words, don't panic. It's okay. People have sat in that chair before with less experience, with more experience. You're there for that individual. Stay in the moment. Don't overthink it. Check for understanding and check for clarity.
Yeah. And remembering this is their space. And your role is to structure and hold that space for them. And whilst you may at times think, well, I'm not doing enough, I'm not adding enough value, you're underestimating the power of that space in its own right. For somebody to come and be given that protected, confidential, non-judgmental time to sit with themselves is powerful enough for them to have some really good realizations. So just bring yourself to that space and support them with genuine care and curiosity. And thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Nice way to spend an afternoon.
Fantastic.